Hi, my name is Peter Spragata, and I'm really excited to talk to you a bit about Ansible Network. In previous segments, we talked a lot about what Red Hat's doing as a company. We've dug into a bit about the Ansible architecture itself, but now it's time to get to the good stuff, right? Let's get to the networking. This is the stuff I love. It's the stuff I'm sure most of you love. This is our world. This is what we're all here to do. So let's dive in and see what happens. You know, it's been an interesting ride the last few years because I've watched an awful lot of people talk an awful lot of things about Ansible networking and what we're doing and what we're not doing. And I have learned, I was just at Cisco Live, a month or so ago, whenever it was. And I tell you what, I have learned Ansible can do all kinds of things. It's amazing. I didn't know some of the things Ansible could do. It's fascinating to me.
With sufficient thrust, pigs fly just fine.
Absolutely.
Rainbows, unicorns.
It's great. I mean, oh, wow. So let's talk about what Ansible is absolutely not. So let's get that out of the way first. We are not an SDN. We're not an SDN controller. We have nothing to do with SDN other than I can automate an SDN controller. That's it. I'm not trying to be an SDN controller.
Well, that answers that question. We had that conversation a year or two ago.
That's one down.
So I have no wants to be an SDN controller for no other reason because that's not what we do. It's amazing how many people want us to be an SDN controller. And I'll be honest with you, we get pushed hard to get into the SDN space. Now, first question is, well, what the hell is the SDN space? I don't know, but if you can figure that out, great. But we do get pushed. We get pushed, be a controller, be an SD-WAN play, do all the, and no. Again, going back to what I said earlier, right? We know what our place is in the world. We know what we're good at, and that's where our focus is. We're laser focused there. The second favorite one that I get asked a lot is oh, well, you're Red Hat, you're host networking, right? That's not real networking. No. This isn't about host networking. Everything we do from an Ansible network standpoint is all about how we automate physical routers, switches, firewalls, load balancers, all that stuff that when you talk to an app dev guy, he puts this beautiful cloud here of his application, and he puts a beautiful cloud here of his application, and he says, this one's in New York, and this one's in Tokyo, and then he draws one black line, and he says, yep, that's the network, right? All that stuff that is in that black line, which we all know and love, that's what we do, not host networking. Now, we can do host networking, but that's not Ansible Network. It's also not about virtual networking. This isn't about, I'm going to build you an overlay. This kind of relates to the SDN one a little bit, right? This isn't all about, I'm going to go spin up an overlay, but you're still stuck with trying to figure out your underlay problem. No. And last but not least, this is not about control plane, and this is not about data plane. This is about automating the management plane. And that's what we do. But the way I like to describe it is more along these lines. Ansible is all about how we can evolve network operations. That's what we're about from an Ansible network perspective. Nothing more, nothing less. I, as somebody who's been in networking for 20 more years than I want to even think about right now, it's frustrating to me that we have not evolved our operational tool set. It's really frustrating. You think about what's probably the most successful open source tool out there in networking prior to maybe the last 3 years?
Rancid.
Rancid? Absolutely.
SSH.
Absolutely. Yeah, but SSH wasn't network specific.
Excel.
Come on, Excel is still a major tool.
Absolutely. Number one inventory system out there. But it's Rancid. And to take nothing away from Rancid, Rancid's a great Perl script. But it's a Perl script. That's all it is, right? So anyway, it's all about evolving operations. But the way that we had to do it, and the way that I looked at doing it, is I said, we have to do it by augmenting what is operations today. When we first started down the Ansible journey into networking, I was very adamant in talking with the Ansible CEO. I said, what we cannot do, we cannot afford to simply take Ansible, put some networking speak around it, sprinkle a little fairy dust on it, and say, here you go, here's a new networking tool. Right? That was not the right way to do it. We had to approach it from where is network operations today? And what do network operators know? Show commands and CLI config commands. That's what they know, and that's what had to be our starting point. And as much as the development team hates me for this, I still pound it into their head today that if we cannot automate that Cisco 2600 series router that has a 7-year uptime, that's never going to have an API, that's never going to have a programmability interface, but still has to be automated. If I can't automate that device, I don't have a business. And I have no business being in network automation. Not to take away anything from any other tools out there. But the reality is writing a tool today to automate data center fabrics with netconf and all these wonderful APIs is not a challenge. It's hard, it's not a challenge. You want a challenge? Go automate that 2600 series router. That's a challenge. We also had to make the network more consumable by consumers up the stack. And that was a big part of what I thought about when we put together Ansible. We wanted to make the network consumable, but consumable in a way that kept network engineering in charge. You know, one of the things I hear so much is that we're trying to put network engineers out of business, right? Oh, we can't automate, you're gonna put me out of a job. No, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I contend that network engineers are needed now today more than ever in the day of automation. Because we have to have folks who really understand how these things work. And if you don't, automation, there's nothing there.
The one you should try to put out of a job is the ones who ask the question.
the CLI engineer, the CLI engineer.
The sort of people who can't embrace automation are the people we need to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they're really good at like configuring VLANs, but not very useful at debugging PCAPs or implementing
And that's not
analytics
the job of a network engineer, and a network engineer shouldn't be doing those things.
Exactly.
Right?
So we have a question on Twitter.
Yeah.
Ansible was designed not to be a programming language, yet to solve networking problems harder than push a X to N device. You will end up with a custom module and complex logic in the playbook. How do you plan to approach this problem?
I'm glad someone asked that question. I'm going to ask you to hold that question because I actually have a very specific demo where we're going to actually talk about that. But the short of it is that it's certainly a fair question. But the whole idea is going to be how do we tackle some of these problems and how do we better provide a framework for tackling some of these problems? So we are definitely going to get into that question, and we're going to walk through a demo and actually show you how we're going to tackle that problem instead of me sitting here talking about it.
Okay, perfect. So your answer's coming up.
So the answer's coming up. Absolutely. Stay tuned. So last but not least is this idea of simplification. And what I mean by that is we have to everything underscores in the Ansible world keeping things simple. We had to simplify network operations to a degree, or provide the opportunity for operations teams to simplify themselves. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And how can we go about doing that and trying to simplify what network operations really means. In short, we want to modernize network operations using Ansible. As we've gone through this journey, the whole idea has been, I don't want to walk in the door and revolutionize what network teams need to do or have to do. I can't tell someone how to run their network. I got a ton of networking background. I've run networks, but I cannot walk into the door to any single one customer and explain to them, this is what you should be doing to run your network operations. Because every network is a little bit different, right? So what we wanted to do is build a tool that allowed organizations to define their network operations policies and encode them in Ansible. And that is the fundamental idea. I mean, it's not that there aren't good tools out there, right? Anyone's used HPNA? It's a good tool. The problem is it forces you to think certain ways about doing certain things. And suddenly you find yourself in a world whereby you're designing how you run your network based on the tools that you've bought. And to me, that always felt backwards. I want to run my network the way that I need to run it to meet my own business goals. So I need to find tools that will support that. And that was the idea as we put this all together. So one of the ways that we did this was when we first got started, we started thinking about the connectivity model. So we think about how you talk to network devices today, and it's been a long time coming to have something more than just a CLI and be able to interface with the network devices at a CLI level. But what we wanted to do from an Ansible perspective is we want to say, why should a customer be saddled with having to make operational decisions simply because of how they can talk to the device? I can use automation over here in this part of my network because I've got netconf devices, but these devices over here, not so much. Or I've got to retool my operational environment because I'm going from leveraging a API-based approach to my network device to now netconf to now restconf to now GNMI to God only knows what we're going to come up with next. What we've been doing with starting to build out our next phase within Ansible networking is to say, let's remove this from a burden from the customer. Now, that doesn't mean that people leveraging Ansible in their environment aren't interested and don't want to know this. Of course they need to know this. But let's not make this a gating factor to how they approach network automation. So it allows them to focus on network policy and automating that as opposed to, well, I can only do thus and so on CLI, so therefore I can only do so much automation.
All right, I have a question on this one. So we talk about the three transports right there. The default transport is SSH, right? We just assume.
Correct.
Right? But yet a lot of the things we do and are going to do in the future are all going to be API based.
Yep.
So are we looking at anything to change that transport, maybe move it into the module definition versus the task definitions or things like that? That way because I'm really tired of typing connection : local. Okay.
Yeah, you and me both. You and me both. And that's so. No, there's nothing architecturally we're going to do within Ansible that's going to make that any better. Now, there are some things you can do to make your life a little easier using Ansible config and et cetera, for changing the default, which you can't do, of course. But when we get a little bit further down into this presentation, we're going to talk about Network Engine and what we're doing there to make that a little bit easier for you so that you don't have to do that all the time. So I talk about the Ansible community, and part of what we're doing in the community, and this one's a really exciting thing that we've been working on, is everyone or anyone familiar with the Zool project from OpenStack?
Yep.
Okay.
No, but it's awesome.
They got an even greater logo. I love the logo.
There is no project. There's only
Zool.
So Zool is a test orchestration system, essentially. It actually grew up in OpenStack, and it's designed to do pre-commit testing of code before you merge it with your mainline branches. Well, I would love to tell everybody here that I went to my boss with a $100 million PO for a hardware lab, and he just signed off on it. I did go to him with that PO. I made up the PO because he did exactly what I thought he would do and start laughing, and it's all good. The reality is that, look, from an Ansible engineering perspective, we write all of our code to VMs. We have no hardware in our lab, 0 hardware. But I know, as a network folk, as I'm sure many of you know, that running NXOS in a VM is not the same as running NXOS on hardware when it's talking to the silicon, right? So what we've done over the last 6 to 9 months is we've been building out this distributed pre-gate test infrastructure around Zool. And we are in the process right now of starting to sign up a number of our partners to this program. Essentially what this means is that when code comes into the Ansible project, let's say it's code for an update to an NXOS module, kind of carrying along that paradigm. What will happen is before that code gets merged into Ansible mainline, that code will actually get tested in a Cisco lab behind a firewall, iterated over actual hardware. And the results of that test will then get published back up to a public page where someone will be able to go look, and for any release of Ansible or any build of Ansible, for any hardware software matrix that Cisco's exposing, you can see, are we getting a green or a red? Are we passing or are we failing? As of today, we've got commitments from a majority of our networking partners to come up on the Zool system. So as we start to roll this out publicly, and we'll talk more about this, you'll hear a lot more about this as we get closer and closer to Ansible Fest later this year. But as we start to roll this out publicly, it's really going to help to short circuit folks from having to waste a bunch of cycles to sit there and say, why, banging their head against the wall, why is Ansible not working against, my EOS device running, 415, whatever. If I can give you a sanity check before you've even ever gone down the path, that's a big win. In addition to that, we also are working with some of our biggest customers, and some of our biggest customers are also going to come up on the Zool system. In their case, they're not going to publish results for obvious reasons, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to leverage this test infrastructure such that, again, they can run through sanity checking, and they can actually get a high degree of certainty if a build is going to work against a given version of code. We actually built a system like this, very similar, although we did it internally working with a customer, a big SP. And what they found is that by moving to an environment like this, they were actually able to reduce their device introduction time by almost 2 weeks. Because while they had a massive test plan, as most service providers do, right, a lot of the acceptance stuff was built into Ansible playbooks. So a device came in, new software goes on, Ansible runs against it. Within a couple hours, they know if it's even worth going any further with testing that version of code. Or did it fix the bug it's supposed to? Or whatever else they may be doing. So what does the Ansible network automation world really look like? This is in GitHub. You can check these numbers. If they're wrong, you can blame Andreas. Today, we support 45 networking platforms. I'll explain what a platform is. I'll show you the list here in just a moment. So that's always my question. The next question is, what's a platform? We have over 630 modules for networking. To put that in perspective, that represents over 1/3 of the entire Ansible code base today dedicated to networking. Just to give you a sense of how important networking is to Ansible. Let's look at this kind of from a little bit different look. We first introduced Ansible networking in version 2.1. That was our first GA release of Ansible networking, May of 2016. We had support for 7 platforms and 28 little modules. Oh, gosh. We could actually touch every module every day if we wanted to. It was good times. But it really grew like wildfire. So this is just giving you a sense of the velocity. Now, the interesting part about this, and you notice, as we're getting into 2.6 was just released last month, you start to get to 2.6, you see the curve is starting to taper a little bit, starting to slow down. And that's not wholly unexpected. We're starting to reach that saturation point where we've got enough functionality from a networking perspective built into the core Ansible modules that there's not a significant need for a whole lot more. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't more coming, and there is. But we're starting to see, I expect to see that continue to taper off, and we'll see more incremental adds versus whole platforms showing up. And as I promised, here are all of the network platforms that we support today. And again, you can double check all this against the Ansible source code. The beautiful thing about my job is I've got no want, need, or ability to hide around any slides because you guys can go look at all of this code. There's nothing I can hide from. But let me point out a couple here that are probably maybe a little curious, maybe a little eye-opening to a degree. Apstra AOS, seems like they would compete. Arista CVP, Cisco NSO, Meraki, ACI, there it is. I think that's all of them I want to point out. Yeah, that's most of
SDN controllers.
Yeah, they're SDN controllers, but they also pitch themselves as automation platforms. What's interesting about all of those that I just pointed out, we didn't write a single line of code for any of those. Those were all contributed by those vendors.
Does that mean ACI, you said you were licensed per IP address?
Yes.
So if I use ACI, then I only have to pay for the ACI IP address?
Nope, you still have to pay for the individual node. That even though you're going through the ACI controller,
right,
because the logic in the playbook is still working on the individual node, the way the license agreement is set, you still have to pay for.
But we're not programming per device. We're moving to arbitrary microsegments in the overlay.
Yeah, you still have to pay per device.
Per device in the overlay. So it's a straight out consumption licensing fee.
Correct. The same thing applies true in, say, hypervisor situations. You don't pay for just vCenter, you have to pay for all the VMs running in vCenter.
So how do you get a vendor on that list? Like I work with Microtik Router OS a lot, and I've seen Ansible playbooks for it, but I'm guessing this seems to be something slightly different where it's natively inside the network operating system. And so what does that mean exactly? That it's the built-in device enabler. What does that do for you?
So sorry. Let me make sure I'm very clear on answering your question. When I say built-in device enablement, I mean when you install Ansible, you get support for all of these platforms.
Gotcha. So this is not a piece of software that.
No. We don't load anything on remote devices.
I didn't think so because you mentioned that.
Yeah,
but that's kind of the way I read that when I first looked at it. Okay.
That's a good point.
It's kind of a driver, like a plugin that you can.
It's a module.
Okay.
It's a module.
Gotcha.
It does something. So, and in fact, you mentioned Microtek. In fact, we just got our first pull request from Microtek
Okay.
So Microtech is actually coming, and so they will be in the 2.7 version.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Yep.
Microtick or microtect? Did you say microtect or microtick?
Microtech.
Tick, okay, good.
Yep. Microtech.
Just checking, there is
Yes.
a microtech.
Yes. No. Microtech. But yeah, we just got our first pull request
I
from
think
them.
so. If I may say something,
Yeah, please.
So I think this is the real power, because when people are switching from one platform to the other, the question is always like, oh, I have to learn another CLI, I have to learn this or that. Here it's just a matter of learning a new module.
That's right.
If at all. I mean.
Yep. And we're trying to make that even a little bit easier.